Last night I had this thing I wanted to tell you, and then I was thinking, I'll say it in the podcast recording. I'll just open up with a completely random comment that has nothing to do with the topic, but I've forgotten it. But I did want to say that that would be fun to start telling each other random things first.
Okay.
Maybe
Well,
next
I
time.
can. So when my alarm went off this morning, my first thought was my friend. I was about to say her name, maybe I better not. My friend who has been updating me on her constipation situation. And so my first thought this morning when my alarm went off, because I knew she took laxatives last night to try and resolve the issue, was, oh, I wonder if my friend has had a bowel movement. Yeah, that was my first thought this morning.
That's great. That's exactly what I'm talking about.
Actually, no, we could definitely tie constipation in with gentle nutrition,
Okay.
right?
Yeah. Go right
Yeah.
ahead.
There you go, done.
I mean, yeah, it's kind of self-explanatory.
Let people draw their own conclusions from that.
How would you handle constipation?
I've only had it. Are we doing this? Okay.
We're doing it
I've only been properly constipated once when I
in
was
your whole life?
17. Yeah.
Well, how do you define it?
Not going for 9 days.
Oh yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
never had that.
I was 17. I went to Ireland with my friend, and I think it was a sudden change in diet because I'd gone and stayed with her family and I wasn't, involved in what the food choices were. I think I went from having a fairly varied diet to going to Ireland and what was probably quite a low fiber diet.
Okay, so adding
And
fiber.
that was pretty unpleasant because it was even
Yeah.
one where even when I managed to get some movement, another 4 days went by and I couldn't go and I had to get the laxative stuff from the doctors, the banana flavored greasy one that oils your insides, I guess.
Oh, I didn't know that.
And then I was back to normal. That's the only time. Otherwise, I'm generally as regular as clockwork kind
Me
of
too.
person.
I also wonder if that had anything to do with traveling, because doesn't traveling stop everybody up?
I don't know, does it? Why would it?
Like the stress. I think that maybe the stress of traveling and being out of your routine. There's something about the body
Mm.
that gets a little like, hey, now.
Yeah, yeah. And I think that can happen when I go away, when I would normally morning clockwork person. If I'm in a different environment, sometimes I just don't need to go.
Mm. We are not here to talk about poop though today. We are here to talk about gentle nutrition because there's such a dearth of information on it.
A dearth. Oh, you've used this
Did I
word
do this
before, and
again? Did I
dearth to
do it
me
again?
sounded like a lot. And I can't remember if we looked it up and
We did
either
this
you were
already.
using it incorrectly or you made it up. I don't
No, I
even
didn't
know if
make it
the
up.
word exists. A
Dearth.
dearth. So Steph is suggesting that there is a lack of information. She's just used the word dearth. Let's find out if that was the
Yeah. An
correct word.
inadequate supply, scarcity, lack.
Okay.
I was correct.
Yeah.
Speaking of scarcity, we'll be talking about that in another episode. That's just a little preview. But today, we're talking about gentle nutrition because I find that it's one of these, it's a concept that needs a lot of nuance and I have a whole course on this concept because it's not as forward as it seems, but there's not places to go to learn about it and to really understand it or to get support around it and things like that. There's a chapter on it. And I guess we should begin by saying, what is it? What is gentle nutrition? The term itself is part of the intuitive eating model. So it's the 10th and final principle of intuitive eating. And to be honest with you, I actually don't like talking about it as gentle nutrition with like a capital G and N because it feels like a thing. And my opinion of gentle nutrition as a mindset and to approach it with a mindset isn't to have it be a thing, is to have it be much more low key. Because what I find happening is that people recover from an eating disorder or disordered eating or just diet culture investment and have this period of time with all these foods that they weren't eating before or feel more free around foods. But any kind of segue into nutritional thoughts or considerations at all tends to become more triggering because it feels like dieting a lot of times, or it feels like restriction used to, because we have probably not really ever thought about nutrition under any other lens. Because
Mhm.
from the moment, and I can tell you this from my kids, the way they're taught about nutrition in school is still very much infiltrated by morality and weight stuff, which I've written a letter to them about. But it is part of the way we think about nutrition. So it's possible that none of us have ever contemplated it in any other way. So it feels scary. And my outlook on it and what I run a course for is to address that, is to address I don't care, but I'm not a nutritionist, so I'm not here to talk about what nutritional strategies to use for what conditions. Like this isn't my scope. But the mindset around it, feeling easier with it, feeling like it's not a big deal is more to the point, I think, when you're recovered because of what I just said.
Was it a stage for you then? Would you say that in the beginning, nutrition, everything like that was thrown out the window, and then you
Mhm.
gently reintroduced some? At what stage? Like, what was that
Yeah.
for you?
Yes, it was a stage. So for the first year and a half, I didn't want to know about it. I didn't want to look at salmon or kale or anything we made with almond flour. Um, anything like that. Anything like that. I didn't want to look at it. It really made me like, ugh. I think it's something in my body made me scared, you know? And then probably about a year and a half in, I think what happened was that I had decided not to get any blood work done during my recovery process because I knew that the blood work would be off. And you know me, everybody here, if you've been listening, knows that I react to blood work. So I was like, I'm not gonna do that. I'm not gonna go there. But a year and a half in, I think I was like, all right, it's probably time for me to get a physical again. So I got blood work done, and all of my numbers had actually gotten better, including a lot of my thyroid numbers, which had always been off. But my cholesterol was up, and that, of course, scared me a little bit. So I started to think about, first of all, I don't want to alarm anybody by saying that like any number you get is this, this one number is any definitive indication of your overall health. It's like a collection of numbers. I happen to be a bit of a hypochondriac. So I took one number and decided that it meant something because this is what I do. And felt like, okay, I need to address it. But I also had now this kind of anti-diet mindset where I was like, I don't know. Like, do I need to address it? Is this something you can address? Like, how do I do this in a non-extreme way? And, all of this started to come across. And I got to this place where I kind of got sick of my own internal battle with it. And I was like, there's no reason why I can't return to eating more vegetables again. So I was like, I want to be able to integrate those things back in, but why is this making me feel nervous? So this was the beginning of my exploration of that. And I did get myself to a place where I just kind of like thought about it. And I was like, this shouldn't be scary. This doesn't have to be scary. Me reintegrating these foods doesn't mean that I have to become extreme about it. That was a mental check. I was like, right, that's the thing. Like, I don't have to do that. I don't have to go back to some kind of way of being. I don't have to eat spinach with my eggs every morning like I used to. Like, this doesn't have to be the way it looks. How can this look different? So it was a slow kind of like, all right, I want to see if adding more nutrients to my food and having more fiber and moving more. This was another part of it that's not part of gentle nutrition, but could be considered part of gentle movement reintegration. Does anything for my cholesterol. So that was yes, how the initiation began. And I did end up, long story short, folding in nutritious foods again. And it didn't make me relapse. It didn't make me go back to restriction or anything like that. And that was the test, I suppose. That was the whole like, let's experiment with this and see where it goes. It went well. And then I made a course about it, which I still run.
Was it uncomfortable?
No, actually, like once I started doing it, I was like, oh, the thought of it was scarier than the
Hmm.
experience of it.
And so this was a year and a half down the line, is that right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So it was a year and a half really of very free permission and permission to just not think.
Yeah. Yes.
Was it like not thinking at all about nutrition
No.
for that year and a half, do you think? Or
I'm sure I thought of it because my brain would have just produced the thoughts, but I didn't follow any instinct towards. Wasn't intentional about it. I would say it that way.
yeah.
But I also
Some
wasn't rebellious. In the beginning,
mm,
I was, but the last half, I didn't feel rebellious anymore either. So I'm sure I was eating like salads and things because I like them, but it
mhm.
wasn't like it wasn't like this moment where I was like, I feel like I'd like to think about how I might include more nutrition in my day to day or my week to week, really. It was week to week, more so than I have been thinking about it. I would incidentally be eating things up until then,
Yeah.
but this was a little bit more intentional.
Yeah. So for that year and a half, you would still be eating foods that, would be considered having a higher nutritional value, if you like. But after a year and a half, you're thinking to yourself, can I be more intentional about choosing these foods more often
Yeah.
or having them introduced more? Like,
Yes. and very subtly more often. It wasn't like every day. It wasn't this thing that had to be a rule. It was more like, how can I just be more aware of it without shying away from that awareness?
Yes. Sometimes I listen to your recovery story and it just has sometimes these really neat stages. It's like, oh, like you started recovering on this day. This was the day you
Yeah.
went all in, and this happened, and it's just
There's an
got some
impetus for
lovely.
things. Do you know why? Because I think that what actually happens is that there's that day where something starts, like the cholesterol results, the
Mhm.
birthday. But it's not like the time leading up to that was absent of any thought around it. What I tend to do in any change that I make is like there's a seed, it'll get planted somewhere. And then I'm like, okay, I don't know about that. Let me just be quiet and let that do what it's going to do. And there's a build up, and then something starts to make sense to me. It's all happening in the background. And then there's an impetus for the initiation of the action. And that's what I use. At that point, I'm like, okay, all this has been brewing. Now is the time.
Mhm.
And then
Yeah.
that goes forth. I can't tell you when the actual seed would have been planted. I don't remember that.
Yeah. If we're talking about gentle nutrition, then how do you define what it is? What is gentle nutrition in terms of how it compares to what we might look at the pursuit of high nutritious foods and wellness and health and
Mm.
purity, right up the spectrum into orthorexia?
Well, it's actually defined by Evelyn and Elise as basic being the key word, basic nutritional wisdom plus body attunement. And I think the body attunement is being able to be free enough to notice what do foods make me feel like? What kind of effect do different foods have on my body? Does eating more fiber make me go to the bathroom more regularly? And being attuned to these things from an intuition point of view and an observation point of view, but also being able to say, I'm also allowed to factor in these basic nutritional wisdoms that I know to be true in general, i.e., fiber makes me go to the bathroom more regularly, which some of us might feel intuitively, but some people might not, right? And it might just be like an external source of knowing. Like, doctors might recommend that. Maybe I'll try it. And it's being able to say you're allowed to take those basic wisdoms, combine them with your internal sense of knowing, put them together to make decisions about what you're eating. There's a Venn diagram they give in the book to sort of show the intersection between that attunement and the basic wisdom. I like to keep that Venn diagram on a movement, like in a movement thing, because there's times where I ignore basic nutritional wisdom in order to just attune to like my psychological needs. You know what I mean? Like
Mm-hmm.
that occurs. So sometimes that Venn diagram is more skewed towards attunement as far as like I want to eat birthday cake right now, which isn't going to give me much nutrition, but I'm not factoring that in. And then other times the Venn diagram might look the other way where I'm like, you know what? Like, especially when I'm sick, I crave a lot of carbohydrates and sugars when I'm sick, and I actually have plenty of them while I'm sick. But there's sometimes maybe when I'm leaving the sick, where I'm kind of like that first day you start to feel a little bit better. On those days, I'll be like, I want some pancakes because I've been eating a lot of comfort food, so I'm more inclined towards the comfort food. But I might say to myself, but I think this morning I will have X, Y, and Z instead. Maybe like my eggs and I don't know what else. Something that gives me a little bit more nutrition instead of the pancakes, and that would be using with the Venn diagram more skewed towards the basic nutritional wisdom, and that it's the freedom to move around in a way that makes sense in your life and freely, so that you're not like, oh, what, you chose the eggs over the pancakes? That's not intuitive eating. Like because
Mm-hmm.
you wanted the pancakes. And this is the big misconception, right? That intuitive eating means you have to listen to what your taste buds want or what what you have to essentially. I feel like a lot of way of interpreting it is you have to eat the junk food, quote
Yeah.
unquote. Like you have to eat that's not what intuitive eating is. And it's being able to gently explore this. And I think gently is a key word because if you go too fast, it's scary. But to gently explore this and to just like take out the charge around it, to give yourself more permission to be, like, yes, it's okay for you to choose the eggs, even though you wanted pancakes. That's okay to do sometimes. And people sometimes I'll say that and they'll be like, what? That's not what I thought intuitive eating was, or I don't think I'm allowed to do that, or I'm scared that that's going to be a slippery slope. And
Mm.
that's part of the resistance because it can feel like if you start factoring that in, how far does it go?
So then what are we saying that the basic nutritional wisdoms are?
That's a good question for an RD. I,
Well, then we can talk about it from our own personal
yeah.
experience. We're
Yeah.
not telling people that these are the basic
Hmm.
nutrition wisdoms that they should follow. So for me, I'll share one of mine.
Yeah.
So one
Let's
of
share
mine
ours.
is I know from experience and I know from what I've heard, all of that matches up, that the most satisfying combination of foods is carbohydrates, proteins, fats, and fiber. A combination of those four together tends to be the most satisfying and sustaining. Like
Mm.
you say, there are going to be times when I'm going to have a meal which that those four proportions aren't necessarily there in a particularly whatever the balance would be way that would be optimal. I don't even know, because for me it's just a more instinctive thing, and that's fine too. But there's a basic nutrition wisdom there that I've heard about and makes sense in my
Hmm.
own experience.
Hmm.
So I'm not saying every meal has to look like that, but I do want quite a few of my meals to look like that. And one week that might look like more, and one week that might look like fewer meals looking like that.
I agree with you. I think that's a great one,
Mhm.
and one that I totally agree with. Another one might be just this very simple one, that like vegetables make my body run like more efficiently in my digestion for sure. And I think from an energy perspective, I think
Mhm.
that there is an energy that having fresh food gives me. Not
Mhm.
just fresh, by the way, it could be cooked. Um, and also that it's just nutritious. Like, I don't
Mhm.
think, yeah, I feel like vegetables are generally, they have a positive effect on my body.
And this one, not necessarily such a tight, it might be using the word nutrition a bit lightly, but simply like hot food is more satisfying than cold food. If I don't have a hot meal at all, to be honest, a lot of the time, at least two of my meals a day are hot meals, because that is just satisfying and feels good. And I can't even tell you why it feels so much better, but it
Mm.
does. I could have the same food cold, or I can have it hot,
Yeah.
and almost invariably feels better, tastes better. I feel better afterwards and more satisfied when it's hot.
That's one that I only partially agree with for myself. But again, these are individual, and
Mm,
that's more
mm.
to the point than anything.
Tell me about the bit that doesn't agree with that for you, how you experience it.
I definitely, in some things I'm like, yeah, like a salad doesn't feel as sticking power as a hot meal with all those same components, the same macronutrients you mentioned. But there are times where I have like if I make lasagna or chili or rice and beans or anything like that for dinner. Did I not mention this somewhere recently? If I have leftovers for lunch, I have to have it cold.
Mhm.
It's more
Oh yes,
satisfying.
we've talked. Yeah, 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 we've
Yeah.
spoken about. Yeah, yeah. Funny girl.
It sticks.
Another
Yeah.
one.
Go ahead. Funny girl.
Another one, which again is this is not a rule for me because I will sometimes not do it, but in the moment, I think it's more nutritionally wise for me if I'm fancying something sweet and it's close to meal time to have my meal first. Simple as that. Sometimes I will have the sweet thing,
Hmm.
but if we're talking about gentle nutrition wisdom, I
Hmm.
don't know, let's say I'm somewhere and we're having dinner at 7 and my friend offers me a cup of tea and a couple of biscuits or cookies for you American guys.
Yeah.
I'm gonna just have it. I'm not gonna go,
Right.
oh, well, I need to wait till after my meal before I eat the
Yes.
cookies, blood sugar, and all of that. But that said, my thing at the moment, I mentioned it somewhere because somebody mentioned it back to me. Don't know if I mentioned it on the podcast or my YouTube channel. Tesco Tiffin. Just love it. I just love it. At the moment, Tesco Finest Tiffin. They're
Tiffin?
just a Tiffin, yeah. A little bit like a brownie, not far off a brownie,
Okay.
but it's got honeycomb in as well. So it's got like just
Mm.
texture wise, I just love it. And I've been really enjoying those. Sometimes I've had them in the middle of the afternoon, but on the whole, I've gone, I think it feels better if most of the time I have it after my meal. But again, it's that flexibility.
Yeah.
Just because it's quite dense and it's very sweet.
Yeah.
So I'm likely to feel less satisfied when I eat my next meal because it'll take too much of my hunger off because it's quite substantial.
Right.
So I think it just lands a bit better. And there are potentially like other gentle nutrition ideas around why that might be that could be helpful.
It's even just the observation. It's not even like the why. It's more just the fact that it works for you.
Mm-hmm.
My favorite part is the point where you're like, but if my friend offers me tea and cookies, or whatever you said, biscuits, that you're like, okay, this is the point. It's like nothing's a rule.
Yeah.
It's okay. It's flexible. It's just like generally maybe this works. And not even just sometimes that might be more a choice we make with intention, and that's okay. That's a safe thing
Mm-hmm.
to do. One similar for me is I do notice, I think I used to not notice this because I would binge so much that it all got lost. But now that I eat more regularly or eat regularly, when I eat closer to bedtime, I actually feel like I wake up the next morning and feel I don't know the word. It's just like a little sluggisher. Like there's something sluggishy. So I have an awareness of that. So like I generally my days, I just find my body likes it when I front load things. But if I'm hungry at night, close to bedtime, I eat anyway. Like I eat, but I just notice that, and it's something I'm aware of. And I generally don't eat that close. That's not like a rule, and want to be very careful that this isn't feeling scary because I can hear it from someone who's trying to deconstruct all this and being like, you're allowed to eat whenever you want, and yes, you are allowed to eat whenever you want. And this isn't something I could have done in the beginning, but now that I know the way my body feels, it seems to be something my body responds to more, to not feel sluggish the next day. It's an observation I make. I don't have a morality around it or an expectation around it. So if I eat close to bed and I wake up the next morning feeling that way, I'm not mad at myself. I'm not like, oh, I failed yesterday. It's just that it's like, okay, that's why I feel that way this morning. So it's an awareness of it,
Mm-hmm.
and that's that.
Yeah. And so to remind the listener, as Steph said, it was quite a long time before she
Yeah,
even started to be intentional about any of this stuff. And that's the important piece. And there will be people who are listening to this who aren't at that stage.
for sure.
So maybe this is just interesting to think about in the future, but trying to apply any of this stuff too soon before the deconstruction could get you
Yes.
in trouble. And similarly to you, Steph, I know I feel much better. I call it like an old lady dinner. I would rather have a big dinner at like
Hmm. Me
5:30,
too.
6 p.m. and be done with it. And exactly like you, if I feel hungry later, I'll have something to eat later. And I've met people who feel so much better if they go to bed with a full stomach. Their body feels really
Mhm.
relaxed and they feel much more ready to sleep by having a full stomach. And there's so much out there, isn't it? About, oh, it's not a great idea to eat late and all of that. That tends to be a lot out there.
Yeah, I don't think it
And this is
matters.
where the embodiment and the testing out of what works for you. There is nothing wrong with you if you're someone who's like, I feel better if I go to bed
Right.
feeling fuller.
Yes, it's very individual. Like there's no one rule. This is why the grid intersects with attunement, right? It's not just basic nutritional wisdom. It's that plus your own attunement to those quote unquote wisdoms, some of which will apply and some of which won't. And this is why the exploration of your own personal attunement is helpful. And I'm going to reiterate because you can't reiterate it enough. If I'd heard, maybe even if I'd heard this conversation or thought about or had any kind of expectation that I needed to be thinking about these things in the first year, for sure in the first year, I would have it wouldn't have served me well. And I also wouldn't have been able to, because here's another thing. I'm pretty sure somebody's listening thinking, well, if I eat dinner at 5:30 or 6 o'clock, that would be sad because it would be like there was nothing left to look forward to to the end of the day. You know, this feeling of like food being this coveted, happy thing that when it's over, we almost feel like wistful or panicky about the scarcity of like it's over. And now I'm not eating, that's it. That's all. You stop at 6 o'clock. And that sort of scarcity and food as like safe and comforting didn't didn't evolve in my own system and psychology for that year and a half, right? Like, so in the beginning, like I needed to have food so regularly so that I could feel like something was always coming and that was reliable. That was reliable. So having dinner at 6:30, I would have probably had to have two snacks afterwards in the beginning in that first year because I couldn't have gone so many hours without eating, without feeling some kind of sense of like, oh, am I missing something? And that changed for me over time. Like because once the stability really roots itself and your body really gets it, that's at the point where now I really prefer to have dinner by 6 o'clock too. And I really like it. And there's no part of me that feels restricted in the evening. None. Like none. Because if there was, I would eat.
Mhm.
And that's not something I was capable of at all for decades upon decades and even into recovery for the first little bit.
Point well made. Another one, which I think I've shared in similar context, if I've been away or something and I've had a weekend or a week where I've just been eating a lot more fun foods, when I come back, that week I come back, I might be a little bit more intentional with what I'm planning for my meals. That would just look like looking at meals that I already regularly have and really like, that just are perhaps more veg heavy if I feel like I haven't had much by way of that.
Yeah.
And so that feels gentle and intentional, but it very much feels like an adding in. It's not, oh, I have to eat less this week. I'm
Yeah.
still allowed to eat all the other foods. I could try telling myself not to, but I know how that would turn out. And that I would think of as a gentle nutrition thing as well, because there is an intentionality behind that.
Yes. That's a
Feels
good
key here.
example. That can feel scary to, I think, at first. Even things like meal prepping or meal planning in any way, which we have an episode on.
It's episode 109.
Episode 109. But I hate meal prepping and meal planning. We do touch a little bit more on this, but it can feel also diety to return to things like meal prepping and meal planning, even when it makes our lives easier and more convenient. This was another thing that I sort of, again, I go in and out of it. And this is part of what I talk about in the gentle nutrition course, is that nothing has to be like some permanent decision you make. And now you're in gentle nutrition phase. So this is how we do things from now on. It's just an in and out. And I will sometimes go into like meal prepping and meal planning phases because it makes grocery shopping easier and it makes my mental load in the nights easier. Same for lunches. Like it just makes my decisions easier when I'm busy. But that was something that I had to really like recalibrate to, because that had only been previously associated with food control and, that rigidity. And again, it's like giving yourself permission to do things that make sense for you without being afraid to do things that make sense for you.
So was there a stage then in your recovery when you weren't doing any meal planning? Because it just seems like with a family, you can't really get away with
Oh,
no
yes, you
meal
can.
planning, can you? Oh, okay.
Oh, yeah. Most of the time, I don't meal plan. Most of the time. I usually usually it's that day. Like right now, I don't know what we're having for dinner, but I'll figure it out. Because
Yeah, you've always got stuff in. So now
yes.
if you catch me on some days and you came around, I wouldn't have anything to offer you for dinner.
Well, yeah. So to some extent, I grocery shop and I'm like, here's a collection of things I usually use. And they're all in
Yeah.
my house now. And then I use
Yeah.
them and then I restock with some variations,
Yeah.
obviously.
It always
But yeah.
blows my mind. I went to a friend's house once and she just rustled us up some dinner from stuff she had in. I was like,
Yeah.
how'd you do that?
Well, you have like certain go-to things.
I love Gusto. I think I should get Gusto to sponsor my stuff because I really like them as a recipe delivery company.
Mm.
In fact, I'll pop a link below. If anybody in the UK wants to sign up to Gusto, I'll pop my affiliate link below in the description or the show notes. And I like Gusto because it has a huge range. So a lot of them, these meal recipe companies will give you like 16 options. Gusto has something like 50 every week. A lot of them are really hearty as well. And I also like it because you get the recipe cards, and as is law really here, it does have the calories on, but it's in the tiny nutrition box in the corner. It's not plastered across it as some kind of amazing, look at how many calories are in here. So I feel like it's the kind of meals that if you want to avoid looking at the calories, you can avoid looking at the calories. And that for me is has been a game changer when it comes to meals. It really helps me as well because I'm somebody who will really struggle to motivate herself to cook. I don't know why I went into the second
Herself.
person. Yeah, I know. What's that all about? I struggle to motivate myself, oneself, to cook. When I bought a Gusto box, because all the ingredients are there and the recipe card's there, and if I don't do it, all those things get wasted. It is enough to give me that shove to do it. And generally, once I get going, I quite like doing it. It's not like I'm hating every single second of it. If it was, I might need to rethink how I did my meals. So that's just something that works, not specifically gentle nutrition, but has just worked really well
But
for
sort
me.
of.
Yeah.
I feel like it falls under that umbrella of what gentle nutrition is talking about, is all of these things that maybe we did during dieting or that could be used as dieting tactics that don't have to be and that we should feel free. Do you know what it all requires though? And this is module 2 of my course, is self-trust. Because if we don't have that sort of internal sense of like, I'm not looking to compromise the integrity of my recovery, like I'm not looking to go backwards. I don't want that for myself. And when you really trust that, that's where I think you can step into the confidence of doing these things. But if you don't, and if there is some part of you that's like, I still feel like I'm tempted to restrict, that's where this is not going to be appropriate. And that, there's more time to be spent here. So it should be spent in the recovery and the deconstruction of the restriction desires and things like that, which is not to say that you can't not want to lose weight, by the way, because the temptation to restrict is different than the desire for weight loss.
Mm-hmm.
So I think clarifying to oneself where you feel on that front is probably something to think about if you're trying to determine your readiness for something like this.
And you can tell that by your emotional response. So if there's anxiety, do you think though, for some people like anxiety, they're just going to feel anxious anyway, even if they're
Yes.
ready?
Yes. So most of the people that come into this course who I believe are ready for this course, and sometimes people will talk to me and say, am I ready? And based on what I hear, yes, the course is made for people who feel anxious about it. Because if you didn't, you would just be able to do it. But if there's anxiety around it, but you also have readiness, this is the intersection of where we need support, because there can be a feeling of like I feel some kind of automatic apprehension about this that still lives in my body that I need to work through, because I think, because I do trust myself and because I'm not interested in regressing, but I feel anxious about it. So that's the very delicate place where, people might find themselves. And typically I would say, like, anyone looking at gentle nutrition has spent a pretty solid amount of time working through all the rest of it first. The gentle nutrition is not something that you really dive into month 2, or like, before you've really looked at all your food rules and stuff like that. People will want to, because everyone's in a rush to get back to, to get back to the safety of things. But this is not, this is a much later part of the process. And I would say this too. I think that people who binge restrict, as opposed, like the restrictors versus permitters, I think it takes like double the time. Permitters seem to have more of an earlier onset readiness for gentle nutrition than binge restrictors. So I'll say that too. That seems to be a pretty common theme.
Yeah, I agree. I think mine was around pretty early on, to be honest. I didn't have a huge amount of food rules, and I didn't tend to get into the more sort of, clean eating thing. I mean, I did go in and out of that, but it was all paleo back when I
Yes.
was in it. It
That
was
word go.
Atkins for a bit, and then paleo was the big one. It wasn't really being called keto then. I feel like, anyway, it's sort of by the by. But this gentle nutrition course that you keep alluding to sounds fantastic, Steph. I hope you're running it again soon.
I'm running it like it starts in a week.
Okay. Gosh, so this
Luckily,
is the last chance for people to sign up if they want to work on some of this gentle nutrition stuff with one of the best coaches in the business, if I may say so.
thanks, man. It starts April 24th, and it is a group course. So it runs on Mondays at 1 p.m. Eastern time, and everything's recorded if you can't make the call. So you'll get the playback, and it's 8 weeks long, and it covers things from perfectionism to self-trust to emotional regulation tools, practical tools, self-clarification, like clarification of goals and things like that, or of intentions, not of goals. Sorry, we don't do goals. And everything is self-led. So there's nothing about it that's prescriptive. It's all like, how does this fit into what you need?
Now, what if somebody's listening to this and they think this all sounds great, but what I really want is to be able to meet you in person? What might you say to them?
You're in luck, as it turns out.
Sorry.
Midway through the gentle nutrition course, there's a week off because I will be flying to London and then promptly going to the coast to see Sarah and Marcus for 2 events that we're hosting. One on Monday, which is we're giving some talks. We're giving some talks on wellness and having a bit of a social evening down in Brighton. Down in
Yes,
Brighton.
it's down
in Brighton. I've never been, but I'll be. And then on Thursday, we're going to have a whole day retreat, a nervous system day retreat on the beach in Bournemouth.
And all the details for all of those things, courses, in-person stuff, will be in the show notes / description below.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of Gentle Nutrition.
Thanks, everyone. See you then.
Bye.
Love you. Bye.